I think you are, because I see the picture up top.
Hello. I'm going to have some more people join us as we go, but I just want to do a quick intro, and I'm going to give a little Zoom overview for anybody that this is their first Zoom meeting. So first, welcome to Art at Noon. It's so nice to see all 133 of you all for this meeting today. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Abby King. I'm the Assistant Director of Adult Programming here at PAFA. And so I'm the one who facilitates these live events that we have each week. So like I said, I'm going to just do a quick Zoom overview for those of you who come to many of these programs already. Sit back, hang out for a second. It'll just take a minute. But those of you that are new, I want to make sure, especially with such a large group, that we're all on the same page. So basically, Zoom has two ways that you can view the program today. So you can be in speaker view, which is the default. So if I'm the giant head at the bottom of your screen, you're already there. I'd recommend you stay in this mode. Since there's so many people on the call, it's the easiest way that you're going to just be able to focus on Anna. But if during the Q&A, when we open it up, you want to see everyone, the way you can change your configuration is in the upper right-hand corner. There's these little boxes. If you hover over it, it will say, whoop, and we've got someone screen sharing. So that happens too. So there we go. Little technical difficulties happen all the time. But if you want to see everybody on the call, even just briefly, you can click on the right-hand corner where it says gallery view, and that will change it into what kind of looks like the Brady Bunch to me. That way you maybe want to see some of your colleagues in the call. However you choose to green doesn't impact anyone else's view. So do whatever feels comfortable. I will also recommend that you go ahead and pin Anna. So I don't want you to lose her in that Q&A or when we do share screen. So Anna, if you want to wave and say hi for a second. So if everybody wants to hover over Anna's little box on the top right corner, there's 3 little dots. You click on that, there'll be a drop-down menu. This is if you're on a laptop. It's slightly different on a phone. It'll say pin video, and then that way Anna is going to be the video you see through the entire screen, so you won't lose her. The other things I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. So a little bit how when we used to be in the physical world, we would ask you to silence your cell phones. I'm going to ask you silence your Zoom screen. So I'm going to ask that everyone stays on mute unless you're actively speaking. So we do want to hear from you for the Q&A, and to do that, I'm going to ask if you will raise your hand virtually. So on a laptop, the way you do that is at the bottom of your screen, it says participants. If you click on that, on the right-hand side, it'll pop up. There should be a little box that says raise hand. So you can do that. We're going to call on you, and then we'll unmute you that way. The other thing is during this talk, if you have links to important articles or other thoughts or questions that pop up, feel free to use the chat function. This is a really great social way to share things as we go. And you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A in here as well, and I will read them to Anna when we get to that place. Other than that, I'm sure I'm missing something, but oh, we are recording today's event, so we want to be able to share this with the people that couldn't be here today. If you don't want to be on the recording, you're more than welcome to mute your camera. So the way you do that is right next to the microphone button at the bottom of your screen. There's a little camera button. I will say predominantly it will just be Anna on the recording unless you ask a question, but just in case, you're welcome to do that. If you'd like to be able to be seen and you aren't, you just need to click on that camera button again and we'll be able to see your face, because it is so lovely to see so many of you here with us today.
How do you show the face?
So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be where it says video or stop video. If you click on that button again, we should be able to see you. That's if you have a built-in camera. There you are. Hi. All right, welcome. So it's my pleasure now to hand you over to my colleague, the Curator of Historical American Art and the Director for the Center of the Study of the American Artist, Dr. Anna O'Marley. Welcome, Anna, and welcome you all.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Abby. Thanks for unmuting me. So I am just in a minute going to share my screen and get us going on our slideshow. I plan to be talking for about 45 minutes or so, and then hopefully we'll have like 10 or 15 minutes for questions at the end. As Abby said, you can type them in or you can raise your hand and I will try to get to them. I really am thrilled that you're all here. I'm a little nervous. There's about 169 of you. This may be, I think I lectured to about 200 in Houston once. So you might beat them by the end of this. So thank you. And it's interesting that I'm giving this talk about women artists in 2020. This is supposed to be the year of women, and people all over the country have done these amazing shows about women artists, and now all the museums are closed. I feel like there's something going on here. But never fear, all of our shows are going to go into 2021 and the women are going to get their due. But I would also like to say that, like many women professionals over the past centuries, I am balancing childcare and my profession. So my child has been told to play the iPad for an hour, and hopefully he will. And maybe he'll make a cameo at the end. So there we go. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. And I know that there are a number of really amazing colleagues on the line, and I don't want to out all of you, but your scholarship has really informed my work. Your camaraderie has really informed it as well. I'd really like to do a special shout out to Sylvia Yunt, who is a scholar of Beaux, and Erica Hirschler, who is a scholar of Chase, if either of them are on the call. So yeah, and Abby, can you tell people, like, if they want to move the images of the people so that they can see the slides?
Yeah, of course. So you're welcome to, if you have it in full screen mode, you can actually move the bar that people's faces are on. So just with your mouse, if you click on it, you can move it around. So if it's blocking some of the text. Also, if you can't see Anna's face, if you didn't pin her, you can use the arrows on either side to scroll until you see her as well. So.
Great. Okay. So the topic today that we are talking about is women in art, championing women artists since 1810. At the turn of the 20th century, the famed Gilded Age American painter and teacher William Merritt Chase exclaimed, "Genius has no sex," in reference to his talented women students. And his near contemporary, Cecilia Beaux, the first female full-time professor of painting at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and actually in the United States, expressed the hope that the hour was near, quote, when the term women in art will be as strange sounding as the topic men in art would be now. While these quotes reveal much about the exciting developments of the professional ambitions and accomplishments of women artists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Beau's quote, and indeed her very artistic reputation, which is nowhere near as well known as her contemporary and sometime rival, Mary Cassatt, and I'm showing you two works in PAFA's collection. Now, I know that everyone on this call knows who Cecilia Beaux is, but maybe not out in the world. Reveal how far scholarship has yet to advance in the study of American women artists. I begin with Cassatt, Beaux, and Chase as a hook to engage you and welcome you into an exploration of the group of talented women artists and some of the men who supported them, working professionally in the American art world from PAFA's founding in 1805 to the end of the Second World War. So the first section I'm going to talk about is Founding Mothers, a legacy of women artists in Philadelphia. Before an examination of the explosion of professional women artists that studied at PAFA at the turn of the 20th century, I'll foreground a brief history of professional women artists in the United States and consider why it is no accident that notable women artists like Cassatt and Cecilia Beaux came from Philadelphia and studied at PAFA. The first art academy and school founded in the United States, PAFA has the remarkable distinction of actively exhibiting women artists since its first annual exhibition in 1811. 3 of the women included in PAFA's first annual exhibitions were Anna Claypool Peale, Margareta Angelica Peale, and Sarah Miriam Peale. All 3 women were the daughters of James Peale and nieces of the famed co-founder of PAFA, Charles Wilson Peale. Many of you probably know Charles Wilson Peale and his great painting of his museum, which is currently at the Smithsonian, and hopefully we'll see it again soon. Anna was one of the most successful miniature painters in Philadelphia, completing more than 150 miniatures in her life and traveling up and down the eastern coast of the United States to achieve commissions. Her younger sister, Margareta, chose to train her focus on still life painting, while the youngest Peale daughter, Sarah Miriam, followed in her cousin Rembrandt Peale's footsteps as a portrait painter in oil and supported herself as an active portrait painter in Baltimore, Maryland, and St. Louis from the 1820s to 70s. One of the reasons for the Peale women's artistic success was their access to their family network of artistic training and patronage. This was similar for the case of Jane Cooper Sully Darley, who was the daughter of Thomas Sully, one of the early to mid-19th century's most popular portrait painters. Darley herself was a well-known portraitist in Philadelphia. From 1825 to 1869, she exhibited works at PAFA, following in her father's footsteps as one of Philadelphia's most popular portrait painters. Familial artistic networks would continue to help Philadelphia women achieve success throughout the 19th century and played a decisive role in the careers of Mary Cassatt, Cecilia Beaux, and Emily Sartain, who we'll get to shortly. We'll come back to Philadelphia. But first, I want to discuss women at home and abroad and talk a little bit about the antebellum period and popular illustration and neoclassical sculpture. Outside of the family dynasties of artists in Philadelphia, significant other arenas of success for women artists in the mid-19th century included the burgeoning popular press and the neoclassical sculptural world of Italy. Both of these groups of women artists were often best known not through their original art, oil or watercolor paintings or clay sculptures, but by their reproductions. Sorry, I think somebody's microphone was unmuted. There were reproductions, Currier and Ives lithographs, Prang chromolithographs, and Italian marble sculptures. While most Americans did not have the opportunity to visit the annual exhibitions of PAFA or the National Academy of Design in New York, with advances in reproductive technologies, a growing number of Americans had access to fine art reproductions for display in their homes. And I'm showing you here a painting by Lily Martin Spencer that I purchased for our collection, and a reproductive print that I found on eBay the other day, just so you get an idea of the paintings and then the kind of prints that you could have bought for your home, that many people could have bought for their home. So Lily Martin Spencer worked with the publishers Currier and Ives. She was trained in Cincinnati and worked there along with New York City and New Jersey. Unlike the Peale sisters before her and many women artists after her, Spencer married, and her husband stayed at home to help raise their 13 children. Yes, 13. Abby, just make sure you can mute people and that we're not getting Zoom bombed. I heard about a friend getting Zoom bombed the other day, so I'm just freaked out about that. So Mother and Child by the Hearth is a classic example of Spencer's oeuvre. Filled with warm sentiment and charm, it shows a mother and child, a modern American Madonna and child, by the light of a middle-class domestic hearth. Currier and Ives made thousands of reproductive engravings of similar scenes of mothers and children in domestic settings after Spencer's painting, which often included herself and her children as models. So this may be a self-portrait of her. Like Spencer, whose work was reproduced by Currier and Ives, the talented watercolorist Fidelia Bridges was best known outside artistic circles for her seasonal full-color chromolithographs of nature produced by the Boston firm of Louis Prang. When the fine art establishment rhapsodized over her watercolors from beginning in the 1860s, and I'm showing you one of our stunning watercolors, it was her mass reproduced images of the 1870s that secured her reputation and fortune. Two of the best known and most successful of a group of independent American women sculptors living in Italy in the mid-19th century were Harriet Hosmer and Edmonia Lewis. Both Hosmer and Lewis lived in Rome, a center for American artists, and in particular neoclassical sculptures, with access to marble quarries and examples of ancient and Renaissance sculpture readily at hand. American sculptors had been working in Florence and Rome for decades leading up to 1850, when Hosmer arrived in Rome, having studied in St. Louis and Massachusetts. The cross-dressing Hosmer became a minor celebrity in Rome, the traditional endpoint of the European Grand Tour, and was famously visited in her studio by the Prince of Wales, who purchased a sculpture as a souvenir. His purchase was a copy of one of her most popular works, Puck on a Toadstool, which we purchased for PAFA just a few years ago. She marvelously captures the impish spirit of Shakespearean sprite Puck in the form of a naughty toddler ready to fling a beetle at the nearest hapless passerby. Her work could be viewed in Rome, but was also exhibited in leading exhibitions in the United States. This work in particular, often her works were shown at PAFA, but we never purchased a work by her until a few years ago. Unfortunately, we do not have a work by Edmonia Lewis in our collection. Lewis was of mixed Chippewa and Afro-Caribbean descent, and she arrived in Italy in 1865. She was encouraged by Hosmer. She had studied at Oberlin and established herself in Boston. So this sort of Massachusetts connection. She was particularly patronized in abolitionist circles, and her most famous work is the full-scale seated figure, The Death of Cleopatra, which was shown in the Women's Pavilion of the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876. Unlike her mostly white male contemporaries, Lewis depicts the African queen in death, after she has been killed by an asp, which gives the work its power, but also caused contemporary critics to describe its affect as absolutely repellent. So these two artists knew each other. They were part of a same circle in Florence and Rome that Henry James described as a white Marmorian flock. They were very powerful, very independent women. So the next section is called The Lure of Paris. If in the mid-19th century, American women artists flocked to Rome, by the 1870s, Paris, with its famous salons, was the epicenter of the art world. And it was here that the next generation of professional American artists proved their mettle, either staying on in Paris or returning to the US, having achieved success in the City of Lights. While female students had been enrolled at PAFA since 1844 to study from the antique or plaster casts, by the 1860s, they were still unable to study the live human figure, the nude. A group of female artists, students, including Mary Cassatt, formed their own group to model for each other. Cassatt was the daughter of a wealthy Philadelphia railroad magnate, and she began her studies in France in the 1860s, where she studied with Jean-Léon Gérôme, as had Thomas Aikens, her fellow Philadelphian. Upon her return to Philadelphia on the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War, she became close friends and studio mates with Emily Sartain. Now, Emily was the daughter of Philadelphia's leading printmaker, John Sartain, who was emerging in the 1870s as one of Philadelphia's most successful women artists. The friendship between Cassatt and Sartain, both in Philadelphia and then in Parma, Italy, and Paris, where they studied together in the 1870s, harkens back to the early familial networks of the Peel sisters. One of the reasons these women were able to achieve success professionally is because of their networks, forged as fellow students at PAFA, as studio mates, as fellow travelers, but in the case of these two, made possible by their status as wealthy Philadelphians from artistic families. In looking at these two paintings by the artists from the 1870s, one can see similarities in the application of paint, the loose expressive brushworks influenced by the study of European masters. Bacchante was completed when the two artists were together in Parma in 1872. By Cassatt and study is probably a portrait of Sartain's sister-in-law, Harriet, was painted in Philadelphia in 1878. And they speak to each other in terms of size and technique. However, by that 1878, the artists had gone their separate ways. Sartain returned to Philadelphia and Cassatt stayed in Paris, where she met Edgar Degas and began exhibiting with the French Impressionists. By the 1880s, Cassatt's painting style is thoroughly in line with the Impressionist style, and Sartain had become the respected principal of the Philadelphia School of Design for Women. We'll hear more about that soon. In Boston, another network of women artists emerged that, like the women in Philadelphia, extended across the Atlantic to Paris. The most influential teacher in Boston was William Morris Hunt, who had studied in Paris and encouraged his female students to continue their studies, like Lila Cabot Perry and Ellen Day Hale. Yay for the Hales! They were two of the most internationally successful of his students. Hale was an independent woman from a long line of accomplished women, and she also served as a mentor for younger women and artists. So this was the case with the work I'm showing you here. Anna Elizabeth Klumpke, who was from San Francisco, and Elizabeth Norse, who was from Cincinnati. They both went on to become presidents of the American Women's Art Association in Paris. And all four of these women studied alongside many male expatriate American artists at the private Académie Julian. So any of you who saw my Tanner show in 2012 would know that he studied at the Académie Julian. So all these Americans are in Paris studying together. They're all friends. They all know each other. So Ellen Day Hale befriended Anna Elizabeth Klumpke when she arrived in Paris. And Klumpke's In the Wash House is one of the artist's greatest works, a salon-sized painting, and it's proudly signed Paris, and was the gift of the artist to PAFA in 1890, 2 years after it was painted. Now, she won a major prize from PAFA for this painting, which is why I think she gifted it to us. Klumpke would stay in France after she met and became the life partner of the famed French animal painter, Rosa Bonheur. And I'm showing you here some paintings that she did of Rosa, and a wonderful object that I found in our collection that I had no idea we had, which is a photograph, album in print, of Rosa Bonheur that Thomas Aikens collected. So she was so well known and so famous that Thomas Aikens wanted a photograph of her to bring back to Philadelphia. In the 1890s, some American women moved away from Paris. Both Perry and Hale followed Monet de Giverny and were influenced by Impressionism's lighter and looser palette. And when Perry returned to Boston, she promoted Impressionism and the work of Monet in particular, just as Mary Cassatt had introduced Philadelphians to the work of the elder Impressionists. And if you want to know more about Boston School women artists, I would really recommend the work of Erica Hirschler. So now we're going to go back to Philadelphia. We're going to focus on the Progressive Era and new women in Philadelphia. So what is the Progressive Era? A period of social activism and political reform across the country, the US, spreading from the 1890s into the 1920s. And there was an efflorescence of opportunities for professional women artists in this period. This period coincided with the popularity of the arts and crafts movement, a growth in the professionalization of certain fields for women, such as popular illustration and landscape architecture, and the movement for universal women's suffrage. Philadelphia, and PAFA in particular, continued to be a leader in women's art education. Alice Barber Stevens' Grisaille painting women's life class was commissioned by the successful illustrator Stevens to illustrate the article, The Art Schools of Philadelphia, published in Scribblers Monthly in September of 1879. One can see in this image how far the women of Philadelphia had come since the days when Emily Sartain and Mary Cassatt could not paint from the figure at PAFA. In the foreground of the image is Susan Mcdowell Aikens, or Susan Mcdowell, sorry, soon to become Mcdowell Aikens, and she is actually painting here from a female nude. And then I'm also showing you a beautiful early painting that she did in our collection. So while Cassatt would remain in France to become a world-famous Impressionist painter, Sartain returned to Philadelphia, where she was the founder of the Plastic Club, the first women's art club in the US, and the very, very influential director of the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, which is now Moore College of Art and Design. Beaux, meanwhile, became the first full-time woman professor of portraiture in the nation, teaching at PAFA starting in 1895. Now I'll get to Beaux in a minute, but I want to show you here a work by Mary Smith. Mary Smith was a very successful animal painter. And so I'm showing you a painting here, Picking Cherries, in our collection, but I'm also showing you a chromolithograph in our collection that is after Mary Smith. And again, like Fidelia Bridges and Lily Martin Spencer, many people probably knew Mary Smith's work through reproduction. So the Smiths were a major family of artists. So again, this idea of familial networks coming up. Mary was successful, but she died young. And in 1879, a bequest in honor of her by her family established a $100 prize for the women artists who exhibited the best painting at PAFA's annual exhibition. And the first Mary Smith prize was awarded to Susan Mcdowell, just one of the many Mary Smith prize winners whose work is included in this lecture. So in 1895, Cecilia Beaux, who had studied at PAFA and in Paris, became the first full-time female professor at PAFA, and in fact at any coeducational art school in the US. Beaux, like most of the artists discussed here, benefited from networks of family and artistic friends. She studied painting with her aunt, Catherine Ann Drinker, as well as the painter William Sartain, who was the brother of Emily Sartain. At PAFA before she traveled to France to study again at the Académie Julian. After winning acclaim at the French Salon with her painting Les Derniers Jours d'Enfance, Beaux returned to Philadelphia to become one of the most successful portraitists of the Gilded Age, rivaled only by William Merritt Chase and John Singer Sargent. Her painting, A Little Girl, is one of her masterpieces. Sweet but not saccharine, Fanny looks forthrightly out at a viewer, out at us. And this painting is so beloved. We lent it recently to a show in Germany, in Cologne, and it was one of the most popular paintings in the show. So Beaux was not only known for her great portraits, but in her role as a teacher. Violet Oakley was one of her most successful students, and I'm showing you here works by teacher and student. After studying at PAFA, Oakley had the career of a Renaissance woman, creating successful illustrations for the popular press, such as June, and becoming the first female muralist in the United States when she received a commission to paint the murals for the state capitol building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Like many of the women before her, it was not only the mentorship of a woman, Beaux, who helped her succeed, but also the network of women artists who lived and worked with her for the rest of her life. As a young illustrator in Philadelphia, she shared a home and studio with two other women illustrators, together known as the Red Rose Girls, which enabled them to support each other emotionally and financially. And so what I'm showing you here is a few images of the Red Rose Girls. So the three artists were Violet Oakley, Jessie Wilcox Smith, and Elizabeth Shippen Green. And in the wonderful photograph that you see up here, Henrietta Cousins is watering her three Red Rose Girls. These women were very smart, and they realized that to be professionally successful, they needed what a lot of men had, which was a wife. And so Henrietta Cousins took care of the artists and took care of the house that they all lived in. So originally they lived together on the main line, and then they built their own home with the help of the Woodward family in Mount Airy, which is where I live. It was called Cogsley. And this painting here, which is unfinished and as yet uncleaned, but it's going to get cleaned somehow soon, shows Violet Oakley looking at her trio, which is Elizabeth Shippen Green, Henrietta Cousins, and Jessie Wilcox Smith. I just love this. It shows them all living and working together and how they supported each other. But you can see in this article here, Cupid breaks up trio of artists. It was this sort of piquant title, a little lascivious. So Elizabeth Shippen Green actually leaves the group to get married to a man. And the choice of this photograph of Violet Oakley looking devastated was talked about in the press about how upset she was. So it is probable that Elizabeth Shippen Green and Violet Oakley were lovers. We know that Jessie Wilcox Smith and Henrietta Cousins remained together for the rest of their life. And so when Elizabeth Shippen Green left the group, Violet Oakley was devastated. Now, she did eventually recover from that. And she met a young woman who was one of her students at PAFA, Edith Emerson. And Edith Emerson is well known here in Philadelphia because she helped found the Woodmere Museum in Chestnut Hill. And I'm showing you here two portraits. One is Violet Oakley's portrait of Edith Emerson cross-dressing as a young Italian page. And then the other is Edith's painting of Violet Oakley. And I want to show you these two wonderful photographs as well. So here's one of Edith dressed up as the page Giovanni, and she would actually write letters in the guise of Giovanni to her mistress, Violet. So she really looked up to her as a teacher, as a lover. They spent at least 25 years living together. And you can see they loved posing and dressing up as well. So this group of women was unbelievably successful in supporting themselves. And what I'm showing you here on this page, a ticket to the Plastic Club. And you can recognize probably some of the names I've been talking about: Miss Emily Stevens, Mrs. Alice Barber Stevens. I'd love to point out to you in this period how many of these are Mrs. and MISS and not Mrs. Cecilia Beaux said, you know, you could not marry and have children and be a professional artist. So, Violet Oakley took that to heart, and she didn't marry a man, but she found herself a wife. One of the only women that is married here was actually Alice Barber Stevens, who was married to another illustrator. But you can see that Sartain was involved, Oakley was involved, Jessie Wilcox Smith, and Alice Barber Stevens in this great professional organization. So at the same time that Beaux was teaching at PAFA, another great champion of women artists was on the teaching staff. William Merritt Chase taught at PAFA from 1896 to 1909. He instructed over 500 women artists at PAFA alone. He also taught at the Art Students League in New York and his own Shinnecock Summer School of Art and Summers in Long Island. And I'm showing you here a group of half-length portraits by women who studied with William Merritt Chase here at PAFA that are going to be included in my upcoming exhibition. So Annie Tricare Lang is one of the most talented and lesser known of Chase's female students, although there's been some great research done on her by Eve Kahn. Lang studied and traveled with Chase, and her works have for years been misattributed to Chase, perhaps to increase their perceived value. This was the case with this portrait of William Merritt Chase, which is in the Metz collection, where the bravura brushstrokes show Lang at her best. And I think this was actually before it was discovered to be by Lang. It was like there was a faulty signature ascribing it as a self-portrait to Chase. And I think if you compare these two portraits that they did of each other, her portrait of Chase and then his portrait of her, I actually think she comes out looking pretty darn good. And she's one of the reasons, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, that I wanted to do this exhibition, because I wanted to think about Annie Tricare Lang and her paintings, as well as Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones, who we'll get to in a minute. Now, these are also scenes, one in a local private collection and one in Boston, showing Annie and Chase's travels together. And you can see that they did very similar paintings on their travels. Okay, so I'm showing you this amazing show-stopping portrait of Lydia Field Emmett. And I believe this is from the Brooklyn Museum, and I believe the curator from Brooklyn is on this call, so thank you, Margareta, for being with us. And this stunning portrait of Lydia Field Emmett is often used to illustrate the ideal of the independent professional spirit of the modern women artists that Chase wrote about in 1891, when he boldly said, "Genius has no sex." In her own successful portrait practice, she focused on paintings of children. She adapted Chase's grand manner portrait style, such as his famed portrait of her, to representing children. And she was very successful in this. And this is a strategy that a lot of these women artists worked on. They worked with children. So one of Chase's most remarkable students at PAFA, and my particular favorite, is Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones. And the Art Institute of Chicago is lucky to own two stunning paintings by Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones. And we have this wonderful work that was actually commissioned by PAFA and is one of our faculty's favorites. But it's a huge painting, so it's rarely on view, but it will be on view in our upcoming show. This is a wonderful photograph of Elizabeth, and I just love how confident she is in this image. And I'm going to show you two of my favorites. In the 19-teens, Sparhawk Jones did a remarkable series of paintings focusing on Wanamaker department store, looking at the lives of young professional women, shop girls, serving wealthy shoppers. Her focus on these figures like her, young women making their way in a professional consumer marketplace, is unique in her empathetic depiction of girls. Elizabeth Carlson has persuasively compared her work to that of her male contemporary William Blackens, who similarly depicted women shopping at Wanamaker's, but he centered his attention on the consumer rather than the worker. And what I love about these two paintings is they really do show this interaction between the classes. So this is probably a nanny with her charge in Rittenhouse Square. And this is a wealthy woman sort of looking maybe a little suspiciously at what's going on here, this interaction of women. And here the shop girls are actually cutting cloth. And what I love about this painting so much is that you can actually see the cutting of the cloth and the care these young women take in their profession. And when you look at this painting in person, you're struck by the parallel between the cutting of the cloth and the painting of canvas. Chase was close friends and supporters of the career of many women sculptors, including Bessie Potter Vano, whose portrait I'm showing you here that Chase did of her, as well as works in our collection. And many important women sculptors studied with him at PAFA, including Emily Clayton Bishop and her friend Beatrice Fenton. And I'm showing you here a Clayton Bishop and then a hand of Bishop by Beatrice Fenton, along with May Howard Jackson. May Howard Jackson was the first African-American woman to receive a full scholarship to attend PAFA, and she studied with William Merritt Chase. And I'm thrilled that in our upcoming exhibition, we're going to be able to feature two works that are new to PAFA's collection, a landscape by Jackson that we purchased a few years ago, thanks to the help of my dear colleague Sylvia Yunt, who drew it to our attention. And then this beautiful sculpture that is currently in the Clayton Collection show that will be able to be seen when we reopen, but is a gift of Constance Slayton to PAFA. So in the last few years, we've brought in 2 works by May Howard Jackson, which is really important. And something I'm interested in exploring that I haven't really answered yet is how Chase, a painter, worked with sculptors and why so many sculptors actually ended up taking his classes. Georgia O'Keeffe, who studied with Chase in New York at the Art Students League, described his instruction as fresh, energetic, and fierce. And the language could be used to describe both the paintings of Sparhawk Jones and the sculpture of Bishop that I showed you. Even though one might not associate O'Keeffe's large-scale flower paintings with the still life genre, that is in fact what they were, and still life was one of Chase's most notable teaching tools at the Art Students League. He was particularly noted for his paintings of dead fish, which he would often work up in class to show his students. And I'm showing you an example of our painting, Still Life Fish, with, which is similar to Georgia O'Keeffe's Dead Rabbit and Copper Pot, so probably something she did in a class with him. I'm also showing you a beautiful portrait by another one of Chase's students, Hilda Belfair, of Georgia O'Keeffe when she was a student at the Art Students League. After studying with Chase at PAFA or the Art Students League, most of his famous students studied, if they could, they traveled to Paris. And this was the case with Martha Walter, whose painting À la Crémerie was painted in Paris in 1910. Charles Decay wrote in Arts and Decoration in May 1911 that this painting was, according to Mr. Chase, the best piece of work Miss Walter has ever done. Indeed, it's an outstanding tour de force that was compiled when Walter was living in Paris and sharing a studio with fellow Chase student Alice Shillay, a great watercolorist. Walter was a native Philadelphian who studied with Chase at both PAFA and Shinnecock. Indeed, this painting stands in dramatic modernist contrast to Walter's American scenes, which tend to focus on women and children at play and the beach. And I'm showing you here, I keep talking about Shinnecock, which was the art school that Chase founded at the behest of a group of women who paid for it and made it happen. And I'm showing you a little bit of his pedagogy and demonstration of his plein air technique. The painting on the left is described as a sketch made to illustrate one way to begin a study. So Chase believed in capturing elements quickly in a single setting. Quote, he explained, "I believe in single sitting impressions. Nature rarely repeats itself, and one does not always find oneself in the same state of mind. It is necessary to acquire the facility possible so that you can immediately express yourself without hesitation. Many of my pictures are those done at a sitting." In addition to showing his technique, what I love about this image is it shows a woman, one of his students, with a white sketch pad in hand, studying the landscape of Shinnecock. And this painting embodies the strength of Chase's teaching, but also his mentorship of women artists and the central role women had in actually creating the Chase School at Shinnecock. Chase's school in Long Island was financed and made possible by women artists and patrons. And many of Chase's paintings from that period tell the story of women artists who spent summers there. 2 works by Martha Walter that were probably painted on the beach in Shinnecock are Showery Afternoon and Gossiping on the Beach. And I'm comparing here Martha Walter's Gossiping on the Beach with a Chase painting in the collection of the Met. Here, Walter creates an almost exclusively feminine space of leisure, women and children at the beach, and labor, women artists painting them. Walter won the Mary Smith Prize in 1909 at PAFA, and her friends included Alice Shillay, Alice Kent Stoddard, Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones. So again, all of these women are painting pictures of each other, they're sharing studios together, they're traveling together, they're really supporting each other, and they're all part of the same network. So I'm going to conclude my talk today by focusing on groups of women artists born in the 1870s and 80s who are synonymous with modernism in the United States. I'm showing you here Florence Stadtheimer and Georgia O'Keeffe. Stadtheimer was born into a wealthy New York family and studied at the Art Students League with Chase before traveling to Munich and Paris. After World War I, she returned to New York and she came to dominate the city's progressive art circles. The Stadtheimer Salon drew major avant-garde figures of the 20s and 30s, including Marcel Duchamp, Elie Nadelman, and Carl van Vechten. In her Picnic at Bedford Hills, she portrays herself and her sisters relaxing with Nadelman and Duchamp in a self-consciously naive modern landscape, while laborers plow the vibrantly flattened neighboring fields. Stadtheimer's Spring Sale at Bendel's from 1921 picks off where Sparhawk Jones's paintings of Wanamaker's of the decade before leave off. This is a fantasy of modern life in New York City, with shopping as the ultimate confection. And I'm also sharing with you a stunning painting of shopping by Hilda Belker that's in our collection, and Belker studied at the same time as O'Keeffe and Stadtheimer in New York. Living and working in the same progressive circles in New York was Georgia O'Keeffe. Like Stadtheimer, she studied at the Art Students League. Her mature style of modernism is influenced less by American folk art, but by the international modernism that was part of the vernacular of the Stieglitz Circle, of which she was the only female member. Her husband, Albert Stieglitz, as well as O'Keeffe herself, were happy to identify her as the modern woman artist. Of course, if this talk has demonstrated anything, it is that there were many other successful and talented women artists working before and at the same time as O'Keeffe, yet her self-promotion has been so successful throughout the 20th century that in many 21st century art lovers, she is still the American woman artist. If Stadtheimer and O'Keeffe were the doyens of the downtown art scene, an equally important group of women artists were molding the art scene uptown in Harlem. Though both the sculptor Meta Warrick Fuller and the painter Laura Wheeler Waring were from Philadelphia, their work is often associated with New York City and the Harlem Renaissance due to their professional relationships with the leaders of that movement. Rather than study at PAFA, Fuller studied at the Pennsylvania Museum and School for the Industrial Arts, and then she traveled to Paris, where she was taken under the wing of fellow Philadelphian Henry Ossawa Tanner and introduced to the American sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens and the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, who was going to have a profound influence on Fuller. While her work in Paris was decidedly symbolist, she is best known for her later works, including her masterpiece, Ethiopia Awakening, which shows an allegorical figure of Ethiopia with distinctly African facial features rising from centuries of slumber in the shroud of Egyptian mummy, a fitting symbol for the Harlem Renaissance. Before traveling to Paris, as Fuller had before her, Waring studied at PAFA with William Merritt Chase. She was the first African American to win the coveted Cresson Memorial Scholarship, and in 1914, that enabled her to continue her studies in Paris at the Académie de Grand Chaumier, but her trip was cut short by the advent of World War I. The same fresh, energetic, and fierce technique that O'Keeffe attributes to Chase's instruction can be seen in Waring's Anna Washington Derry, which is the middle portrait beneath the photo of Waring on my screen. A talented portraitist, Waring received notable accolades for her series of portraits of African-American cultural leaders in Washington, D.C. Waring met Derry when she was working as the head of the art and music department at the HBCU Cheney State Teachers College. I love this sort of half-style portrait, which is the kind of format that a lot of Chase's students seem to use with their peers and colleagues, rather than the full-length portraits for which they might have received a commission. For example, this painting of Alice Dunbar Nelson, who was a leading poet and activist associated with the suffrage movement, the Harlem Renaissance, and the Civil Rights Movement. Like the artist who portrayed her, she was a new woman of the 20th century. And in this portrait, Waring adapts the grand manner portrait technique she learned from Chase. And I'm also showing you here a beautiful recent gift, a portrait from the 1940s, from the Constance Clayton gift, bringing Laura Wheeler Waring into our collection for the first time. As women's professional and political independence grew in the era of agitation for women's suffrage, so too did their access to subject matter. And I'm going to conclude now just by showing you these brief slides, because I want to have 10 minutes for questions to show you objects in our collection from the teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s that continue this story after World War I. So as women's independence grew, they could begin to expand their subject matter. So they could move on to landscapes and cityscapes. For example, these landscapes done by Mariana Sloan and Helen Flex Sayford, which are just stunning and had once only been the territory of male artists. And even as women claim these broader spaces, they continue to innovate in the genres of portraiture and still life. So I'm showing you here a Violet Oakley of Mary Townsend Mason, and then a still life by Mary Townsend Mason, and then William Merritt Chase's palette that Townsend Mason donated to PAFA. So really this shows this network of these women artists. And then again, some more landscapes and city views from the 1930s and 40s in our collection. And so even though I think that this is interesting because this Abercrombie and the Waring, they sort of bring us back to the beginning of our story with looking at still lives and portraiture by the Peel women. And you can see that even as women are working in the most modernist styles, they are still reaching back to topics of portraiture, self-portraiture, and still life to express their artistic nature. And I'm going to conclude with this stunning group of artist self-portraits, hoping that you are able to visit PAFA in 2021 to learn more and see more of these in person while keeping a safe social distance. Thank you. All right, so we have a little time for questions, and I will let Abby control things.
Yeah, so just a reminder for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning of the call, since there are so many of us, we're gonna ask that you virtually raise your hand. So the way you do that is by putting, you click on participants, there'll be an option to virtually raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and unmute you. But we've already got one question from in the chat function, which you can also put in. Anna, someone wants to know if you can tell us who the artists were in the final self-portraits. So there were several people included in that.
Okay, great. Yes. Sorry, I'm just going back. Can you see the screen or can you only see me?
So right now it's just you, for me.
Okay, so let me, hold on.
Take your time.
I can't see the screen really well. So there's a, let me see if I can share the screen again with you so that we can see these while we're talking about them. Okay, so the artist in the center is Margaret Foster Richardson, a motion picture, which I've been thinking lately might be a good cover image for a catalog for this show. This is a portrait by Violet Oakley, self-portrait in mourning for her father who died. This is a portrait, self-portrait by Susan Mcdowell Aikens later in her life. And oh, I think this is Margaret Leslie Brown, who was a student and friend of Cecilia Beaux.
So we have one hand, but we also have another question in the chat. I'm going to read to you, and then we'll call on you, Mary. Someone asks if you can discuss the Impressionism, or Elle asks if you can discuss Impressionism in Philadelphia vis-a-vis Cassatt and Hugh Breckinridge.
Okay, so I would say that Mary Cassatt is very much a French Impressionist. despite the fact that she was from Philadelphia. She was part of the sort of first wave of Impressionists. She was the only American who exhibited with the French Impressionists. So that technique comes very much out of that sort of momentariness of modern life and life in Paris. Whereas Breckinridge is a later generation, and he is both an Impressionist and a modernist. And he is following in the later steps of Monet and this sort of more rural American Impressionism, which is interested in light and color and floral elements, a lot of outdoor flowers, things like that. He taught a lot outdoors. So he's like a later generation, which is filtered through American Impressionism, which is very different from Mary Cassatt's European first wave Impressionism.
Thanks, Anna. I'm going to call on Marianne. I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi. I'm wondering if Jane Darley is in any way related to FOC Darley, the illustrator.
I don't know the answer to that. Oh, Amanda says no. Amanda, would you like to say something? You can unmute yourself. No.
I would just say Brandywine has a lot of FOC Darley, and in my research on him, I've not found a relation to her. It's not to say that it wouldn't happen, but I've been looking at it.
Thank you.
Thanks. And we have a hand from Jennifer. Jennifer, I'm going to unmute you now. I feel like we're having a war. Here we go.
Myself.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I'm wondering about, I assume you're familiar with Ellen Emmett Rand and where you think she would fit into this story. Because she's, same time period that you were.
Yes. So I am familiar with her, and I would probably defer to some of my other colleagues. I believe Rand is either a New York or Boston painter. Mm-hmm. And she is very well explored in Erica Hirschler's work, and is not very well represented, or if at all, in PAFA's collection. Mm-hmm. So my work has focused mostly on Philadelphia and mm-hmm. mostly on the women in our collection. Uh-huh. But Erica Hirschler wrote a great book called A Studio of Their Own, mm-hmm. And I think she explores that topic in there. Mm-hmm. Amanda, you raised your hand again. Did you want to answer that?
No, sorry, totally other topic on this.
All right, I think I did okay. The terrifying thing about this is that it's being recorded and shared uh-huh. with so many people that I think I know, but I don't necessarily know mm-hmm. that I know.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like we, or Amanda, I want to call on you, but I also want to read this question from Laura. I go in the chat first, if that's all right. And hi, Laura. She was asking what exhibition opportunities were like for women in Philadelphia, and if you know what percentage, approximately, of exhibitors in PAFA's annual exhibitions in early 20th century were women.
Laura, that is a great question. And one of the things that we've been trying to do with this project is really drill down into our archives to figure out, for example, who studied with Beaux, who studied with Chase, who studied with both of them. Like we know Violet Oakley, for example, studied with both of them. A lot of the women have, the women that I've studied left oral histories and letters in particular that talk about Chase and what a great teacher he was. What we've been trying to do is study the registration records of PAFA's archives and track them to see who was registered in what classes. And I've had some volunteer curatorial assistants over the years do that work, but it's very detailed work in the archives. And unfortunately, our archives is now closed. I know we will be opening again, so that work that can be continued. And then one of my colleagues, our colleagues in Boston, Diana Greenwald, I've often wanted to work with her, who does she does a lot of statistical studies of art history, and see if we could sort of figure that out. I mean, what we could do is go through all of our annual exhibition records and figure out the percentage of women in those annual exhibitions. We have the data, we just haven't crunched all the numbers. I do want to, there was one question in here that I liked that I wanted to address, which was the question, did any of these women painters influence male artists? And I like that question because it brings up something that I've often thought about with these women, is that often when a woman artist marries a male artist, she sort of gives up her career to support his. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Like one example could be Bessie Potter Vano and Robert Vano. Robert Vano is a painter and Bessie's a sculptor, and they just sort of do their own thing and they're both successful. They don't have children though. Okay, no kids. When they have kids, like in the case of Mariah Oakey Dewing or Philip and Lillian Westcott Hale, sometimes it is the case that the woman artist is maybe the better artist, the more successful, but they are the ones who have to give things up. You know, Lillian Westcott Hale does these amazing, stunning drawings. I didn't show any of them to you, but they're spectacular, so as not to compete with her husband's painting practice. Mariah Oakey Dewing switches to flower painting, so not to compete with her husband's figure paintings. So that is a case where I think the women definitely teach the men something. And in fact, I believe William Merritt Chase said that he thought he had nothing he could teach Lillian Westcott Hale, that she was so talented. She studied with him at Shinnecock that he just didn't want to even, like, he's like, you can come, but I can't teach you anything. But I would have to sort of ask somebody like Sylvia Yunt if male artists talked about studying with Cecilia Beaux, for example, and what they got from her. That would be something really, really interesting to explore.
I think we have time maybe to hear from Amanda, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you very much for mentioning the suffrage movement throughout. And I wanted to put in just a little word about the Plastic Club and the suffrage movement.
Yes, please talk about that.
So in our current exhibition at the Brandywine, we have a poster that we've borrowed from Schlesinger at Harvard, and it is for suffrage plays to be presented. I'm looking at it here on my screen, February 16th, 1911 at the Broad Street Theater, and the place where you bought your tickets was the Plastic Club.
Yeah, and I think the Plastic Club, you know, we could probably, there's some such great clubs in Philadelphia. I know William Patterson, who was on this call, has done all this work on the Sketch Club, but the Plastic Club is just at its amazing center of women's leadership. You could probably do an exhibition just on the Plastics Club. But I did, you know, I do have a little, a love for William Merritt Chase. I don't think he was the perfect man at all. But I will say that he was one of the men who gave money to help start the Plastic Club. So, you know, nobody's perfect, but there are some people who have fought for women's professionalization over the years, of the male sex as well as the female. I love everybody's comments, and I don't want to say goodbye because you all have such good thoughts. And Abby, but we probably should let everybody go, right?
I think so, but I know this just means there's more interest, and we'll definitely be, connecting with this subject again in the future. So thank you all so much for being here with us, and thank you, of course, to Dr. Anna O'Marley for being such a lovely speaker as always.
Thank you all, and yay! Thank you for joining me, and I love all these thank yous. Can I stay on?